everyone, and welcome to week 11 of University 300. I'm Professor Nicholas, and this week I want to talk about evaluation, peer review, and the concept of annotated bibliography. So, well, let's get into it. When we're talking about the evaluation of scholarly sources, the tool we have to use this week is something that is cleverly titled the CRAP test, which is, it's going to be a tool that we can use to evaluate the sources that we found for a project based on several different facets or perspectives of its usefulness. We're also going to talk about peer review, what peer review is, and why it seems to be so important, or at least why a lot of your instructors insist that the resources that you use have gone through this peer review process. We're just going to talk about what that means and how you can tell if a journal or a journal article that you want to use is peer reviewed. And finally, and very briefly, we're going to talk about what an annotated bibliography is, because, hey, it's what we're doing for the final project in this class. So give you some context and show you how we've been working up towards this for most of the term. And you've already done almost all of the work that's going to be involved in putting together this final project. In terms of evaluation, this test that we use has the acronym CRAAP. What those stand for is much more important than the clever name. The first is currency. And in that case, we're talking about currency in terms of time, not money. So currency just tells us how recently something was published. And that's going to help tell us how relevant it is to a conversation. As we mentioned earlier in the course, scholarly communication, as we see in journal articles that reference each other, is a conversation. It's going back and forth. And if your work is relying on scholarship that's a little too stale or a little too old, it might not have new things that we've learned that are very important. So that's why we ask to look at the currency of a source you're going to use just to make sure that it's new enough for this conversation. You know, what ends up being new enough is going to change from discipline to discipline and project to project, but you'll need to look into that and determine for yourself whether the resources you're using are new enough. The R stands for relevance, and that's going to change from one project to another. An article that's great for one project is going to be worthless for another one. So what you're really looking at is, how am I going to use this? Does the data in this article help me answer my research question? Is there something in here that I can use to prop up the argument that I'm building? That's what relevance tells us. You need to be able to say why you're using this article, why it's in your citation list. Because if it's in your citation list, honestly, because the instructor says you have to have, say, 12 citations, the rules state in professional academic publishing that if you don't cite it, if you don't use it, if it's not actually in your article propping up something, then you can't have it on your reference list. So relevance is how we answer, what are we doing with this? How is this helping us? Authority lets us know why we should listen to the author. Are they an expert? Do they have experience in this? Are they highly educated in this? What are their bona fides? Something that we need to know. Why are we trusting this person? Next is accuracy. Can the results or the conclusions be verified? Do they match what we know? Are they pulling numbers out of left field, or are these the same numbers that other people are working with? That's the sort of thing that we're looking for. And finally is a little more tricky, but purpose. Sometimes this is lumped together to say purpose and scope. Scope is, what is the set of things that the article is talking about. Is it talking about one thing very, very specific, or is it talking about a bunch of things interacting together? That will help us determine whether or not we can use it or whether or not it's useful. And the purpose, is it to communicate research? Is it to educate? Is it to inform? Is there something else going on? You'll want to see why the article was written, because almost all the time the article was not written to give you a source to use in your bibliography. Even though that's the only reason you care this article exists, you still need to look at why it was written in the first place, or what place it holds in the ongoing scholarly conversation. And it's also to remember with this test that this evaluation test, what it does is it helps us remember the key areas that we want to examine and evaluate in our sources. Um, Currency, how it relates, accuracy, authority, and let's go back and look at the purpose and scope. Those are things that we need to know about. What the CRAP test does not do is tell us which documents or sources or articles are good or bad, right or wrong, true or false. That's not what the tool does, and that's not what it's intended for. It's instead intended to give you the tools you need to be able to articulate why you're choosing to use this article and not some other. Next thing that we want to talk about this week is peer review. I'm guessing that you've all heard peer review used a lot. You've been asked to find sources from peer-reviewed journals or scholarly journals, academic sources. All of those can sort of blend together and mean mostly the same thing. But specifically, when we talk about peer review, what we mean is when a scholar has finished their experiment or done their research or done their theoretical work and published it. Peer review is the process, and this is done at the journal level. So the editors of the journal have a bunch of experts, people who publish in the same field, who are current and up to date and have read all of the important work. They give them drafts of this article to read, and they go through it and they make sure that the data is collected using methods that are approved, that the conclusions that the person is making logically follow from the data that's there. They make sure that the content in the journal article matches what we know. I'm going to repeat myself a little bit here. Got a little excited and got ahead of myself, but peer review compares new research to what we already know. So as I mentioned, they look at the methods and the conclusions and see how well they match our current understanding. And what that does is it helps us to be sure that we have a certain kind of quality before the scholarship can be published. Now, it's not perfect. It has been there have been academic fraud where people cheat the system. There have been cases where entire journals have been created by the pharmaceutical industry to post or publish peer-reviewed material that's friendly to these products that they've invested a lot of money in, regardless of what the science actually says. So it's not 100% perfect, but it's a whole lot better than just being published and not having that review, or not having us know what the review process is. So when we say we want you to use a peer-reviewed article, what we mean is we want the author of the article to have gone through this process of having multiple readers, of people who are experts and acknowledged to know what they're talking about in the field, to look at it and say, yeah, this is worth reading. Oftentimes, peer review process leads to revisions. A peer reviewer might say, this is really interesting and I like where it's going, but you don't cite, this expert in the field whose work is really important. Her opinion needs to be included in your argument, or else it's lacking something. and then the author would go back, look at the thing that the reviewer said, and possibly include that in the conversation. And finally, if you're asked to find peer-reviewed work, we can tell you where you can find it. But sometimes the question is you have a citation and you just want to know, is this peer-reviewed or not? Ulrichs is a database that can show us whether a journal is peer-reviewed or not. And I'll take you there and we'll do some sample searching in it in just a little bit. But I want to warn you also against two kinds of things that can appear in journals that have peer review that are not peer review. So actually that word review is something that's key. Be very careful of anything that says review. Book reviews in particular can be published in peer-reviewed journals and they're not peer-reviewed scholarship. You know, if you put that on an assignment, I or another instructor would say, that's very interesting and it's probably helpful, but you need to go find the book that's being reviewed, not just this short book review that it's about. Other things that are like that can appear in can appear in peer-reviewed journals are things like letters to the editor or other bits of communication that aren't actually scholarship. So you have to read the thing that you're looking at and make sure that it actually is a piece of scholarship, that it has a method section and it has lots of citations and a list, and then it's not just someone giving their opinion about something as they would in a letter to the editor, and it's not a book review or something like that. But let us take a look at Ulrichs. So let's flip over, and you find this through the library the same way that we will find other databases. But if we go, let's see, I'm searching for a journal here, so let's do a new search. The way you would use Ulrichs, you would almost never go to Ulrichs without having a journal in mind that you're wanting to check. I mean, you could, let's say we're looking at organic chemistry. If we did a subject search, we can find journals that have the word organic chemistry in the title, and we can find information about them. But it's much more likely that we'll have a citation for an article, and we want to know if it's peer-reviewed or not. So we can look for the Journal of Academic Librarianship, and we can find information about it. So if we click on the title, there's a field here in Ulrichs where it says refereed. Refereed, juried, peer-reviewed all mean pretty much the same thing. At the level that we're working at the undergraduate level, we don't care the difference between them. At any level, generally it's just that different disciplines call the same thing by different words because that's the way academics do things. We're very territorial and we do things our own way in our own discipline. But also take a notice, this refereed icon, which looks like it's about 8 bits in quality, and maybe it's an open book. Actually, let me scroll up so you can see that. That's not going to show on the screen. Interesting. Let me go back then. As I scroll up, look here at the Journal of Academic Librarianship at the top. In this column over here, this is the icon I was talking about, the black, maybe it's an open book 8-bit icon. That will tell you right off the bat that it's refereed or peer-reviewed or juried. And so if you want to know, you just look up the title of the journal you're interested in and look to see whether it has this next to it. You can also go to the journal and read their editorial policy, and you can read their peer review policy. There are different kinds of review. Most peer review is blind, which means the person being reviewed doesn't know who's doing the review. A great deal of it is double blind, where the person doing the reviewing doesn't know who wrote the thing, which leads to, sometimes humorous notes where someone will say, you really need to cite this work that's the most important thing in the field, and they're telling that to the person who wrote the work, but they don't know because it's double blind. No one knows who's there. There's also, coming into popularity, something called open peer review, where it's done in public where everyone can see, but that is a newer thing, and it doesn't quite have the establishment of the others. In any case, this is what Ulrichs is really useful for, especially for undergraduates, is just finding out whether a journal is refereed or peer-reviewed or not, and that's how you do it. So going back here, the last thing that I wanted to talk about was what an annotated bibliography is. And it's what it sounds like, really. It's a lovely descriptive name. It's a bibliography with notes. Now, there are different kinds of annotated bibliographies for different kinds of purposes, but basically, they'll tell us, what resources exist on a given topic. And that's where, outside of the classroom, where you'll find them used the most, is something will happen or something will be important. And so someone will go out and look for things that have been published on this new thing and make it all available to people who are new to the discipline. Those are also, that kind of annotated bibliography is most often referred to as known as a literature review, or something along that lines, where they're doing a bibliography of literature in a particular discipline. So, what an annotated bibliography will tell us: what resources exist on a particular topic. Where can we find them? Right? What resources exist is just the bibliography part, the list of sources. These are things that I used in my project, or these are all articles written about police violence in wake of the protests in Ferguson, Missouri. Various different things they can be. Tells us what's out there, what their names are, what their titles are, where to find them. That's the citation part. Every little part of an academic citation is there for a reason. It's helpful for something. Or it was helpful once upon a time, and we got used to using it that way. The Digital Object Identifier, or DOI, does a lot of the jobs of the citation, I think a little better and faster, but it might be some time before that's fully adopted. So it tells us where to find them. It tells them, if it's a descriptive bibliography, what they say. It's very common for an annotated bibliography to contain a little bit of a summary. The one that you're creating will have a description of what the article is about. And there also is, frequently, yours will have this, an evaluation component. How important are these articles to the field? Sometimes they're ranked on tiers, primary, secondary, and tertiary, which is to say, these are absolutely the most important. These are the primary articles in the field. These ones are secondary. They're good, they're solid, but they're not, the best, but they're still necessary. And tertiary is, well, these are third level. It's good, solid research, but you can be excused if you haven't seen it because it's not the central stuff. And that's what I have for us this week. So if you have any questions at all, shoot me an email, schiller@wsu.edu, or come to my office hours. Sometimes I call these the loneliest hours of the week. Mine are on Thursday from 2:30 to 4:30. I can be reached at other times. Reach out to me. Email's probably the easiest way to get a hold of me. And we can set up an appointment to do a video conference or a phone call or something at another time, whatever your preferred methods of communicating are. In Canvas, you'll see the readings that this short overview were based on, and a little more information, and your assignment for this week, which is to do some source evaluation and write up some citations. In any case, I hope you are feeling well and coping reasonably with the state of the world today. And I do look forward to hearing your questions. Cheers.